The US Defense Secretary has called the recent strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities the most complex and secretive in military history, but he gave few new details about their impact. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has now acknowledged what he called serious damage from the strikes, saying an assessment was underway, but he disputed President Trump's assertion that there would be US Iranian talks next week, saying no such plan had been set. Our chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet, is in the Iranian capital, Tehran. She's being allowed to report from there on condition that none of her coverage is used on the BBC's Persian service, which broadcasts to the people of Iran. This law from the authorities applies to all international media agencies operating in Iran. This is the report Lyse said earlier.
Iran's state TV, the studio where the supreme leader's speeches are aired, but not today. Not after Israel attacked it. Forcing the newsreader to flee, her desk devoured by fire. Today, a fiery message of his own from the Ayatollah, said to have sheltered in a bunker during the war.
Iran, with its iron national resolve, rejects surrender. For a country like this, the idea of surrender is laughable to anyone who truly knows the Iranian nation.
For now, a fragile ceasefire. Tehran starts to look like itself. Its infamous traffic, its beautiful bazaars. Residents slowly returning to a city they left to escape the bombs. But for some, it's still a battle, just to breathe. In this ward, there are civilians, not soldiers. Murtaza shows his scars. He was working in the transport department when the entrance to the notorious Evin prison was bombed.
Israel
lies, saying they are only hitting military and nuclear sites. They hit a prison. I was there. I was hurt. And I'm amazed countries like England, France, the US and the UN don't condemn Israel.
The abandoned American embassy, a monument to Iran's troubled relationship with the West, accused of sponsoring terrorism, of trying to develop a nuclear bomb. Charges Tehran denies. But even inside this former embassy, a cafe serving iced Americanos. Amir tells me he wants to see a better relationship between America and Iran. So many Iranians do. But in this dark time, there's still not much light. The message in public was defiant. But this blackened studio symbolizes this dark moment in Iran, the most difficult and dangerous decisions confronting the supreme leader, the most fateful choices in his nearly 40 years in power. A new, uncertain chapter in an old, long-standing war. Lyse Doucet, BBC News, Tehran.
Well, Lyse joined us live from Tehran a short while ago, and she told us it's still unclear just how much damage was done to Iran's nuclear facilities.
Well, as we've been reporting on the news, there's been so many different assessments coming from different capitals. The United States continues to use the exact description, starting with President Trump, who, in the immediate aftermath of those unprecedented strikes on Iran's three main facilities, talked about how the American bombs had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Then you had the intelligence assessment saying it was more limited, that it had only been set back a few months. And then yesterday, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, made his first speech since President Trump announced a ceasefire, accused the United States of exaggerating the extent of the damage. Perhaps the clearest assessment came from the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, who did say there had been serious damage. But the big question everyone is asking is just how far does that damage go? And the question the rest of the world is asking is in what way and how soon can Iran resume the nuclear enrichment?
That was Lyse Doucet speaking to us a little bit earlier. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Dan Johnson, who's in Jerusalem. Dan, we heard a defiant tone from Iran's supreme leader around, 18 hours ago. But today, hearing from the foreign minister that serious damage was caused. How close will we ever get to knowing the truth of how much Iran's nuclear program has been set back?
It's really difficult to see if we'll ever get firm evidence or clear answers on that. Iran is at the moment subject to monitoring and inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, but there have been moves since this conflict in the Iranian parliament for Iran to drop out of IAEA monitoring. So in terms of how that's going to be observed in the future, how Israel, the Americans and the rest of the world is going to reassure itself that Iran isn't rebuilding its nuclear program, that is something that'll have to be negotiated and agreed. And at the moment, the Iranians are saying they won't participate in those talks until they themselves have a full assessment of exactly what the level of damage is. So in the meantime, you've got this war of words and this fight to control the narrative over exactly what has happened here, and it may not in reality actually matter what happened on the ground. The Israeli leadership is trying to tell its people that this conflict was justified and worthwhile, that the US strikes were necessary and that they have achieved their aim. The Iranians are trying to tell their own people that their nation isn't weakened and that they could rebuild their nuclear program if indeed they choose to, although they maintain that is not in pursuit of nuclear weapons, it's just for nuclear power. The rhetoric's completely swapped over if we go back 2 weeks to the start of this conflict, when the Israelis were saying that the Iranians posed an existential threat. The Iranians were saying nothing to worry about, we're of no threat, there's nothing to be concerned about here. Now you've got the Americans and the Israelis saying that the threat has been neutralized, but the Iranians maintain they could potentially rebuild their nuclear program.
Dan, thank you. That's our correspondent Dan Johnson in Jerusalem for us.